Hey, hello, Itzik. How are you
Oh, hey
doing?
there. Good.
So, Itzik, I've been looking through your LinkedIn resume and your
Uh-huh.
Twitter, and been thinking I've known of you for a very long time, and had the pleasure of attending some of your pre-con sessions in the past. You've been an instructor in the SQL space for a number of years. Can you
A number
tell
of
us
decades.
a number of yeah, number of decades? Can you talk about the beginning?
Sure, I'm not sure if it sounds good or bad. It's been so long. Uh, the beginning. Well, actually, I come from a family of teachers. My dad used to teach mathematics, and my brother teaches in architecture kind of school. My sister teaches English. So yeah, it's probably somehow in our blood. But for me, the first exposure was in the late 90s. Um, so I did all kinds of things related to computing and database and so on. But the first time that I taught was such a natural experience for me. I mean, it was both kind of scary, the first time you stand in front of a very large group of people and so on. So I remember the first time I went into the classroom, my heart was beating so hard. But after you get over it, and you realize, some people have, you know, uh, I don't have to say an affinity for this, but they really, it's kind of natural for them, and it's a fulfilling experience for them. So for me, this was the experience. And yeah, I never looked back pretty much. So I guess somewhere around maybe 98 or so is I think my first kind of experience. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And
Yeah.
so I see the branding of the company is now Lucient, but before that it was Solid Q, and before that it was Solid Quality
Solid quality
Learning.
learning. Yeah.
Is it was that when did you get that started? And tell us a little bit
Well,
about
this was
Solid Quality.
2002.
Okay.
The first time was 2002. Um, Back then, in one of those conferences, I wasn't actually there in the meeting, but a few people who kept meeting each other in those conferences, like past, like back then there was a SQL Server magazine conference, a bunch of those. Uh, Met, and I just happened not to be in that particular conference, but a few people were sitting and saying, we really like each other, we like meeting each other, and maybe we should do something together. Perhaps it will work better than us doing kind of our thing individually. And apparently my name was brought up there, and I was contacted back then by Fernando
Oh,
and
nice.
asked if I wanted to join, and I jumped on it, of course, immediately. So it started as solid quality learning, but just because we wanted the acronym to be SQL, SQL, and back then most of it was about training, but very quickly it transitioned to a lot more customer work. Training actually became a pretty small part of the business, even though that's what I like to do best and what I do mostly. The company does mostly customer work. So at some point it rebranded to SolidQ, and recently, the thinking was to try and emphasize the fact that we try to bring more insight and more light, to our customers. So, yeah, for me, actually, I have to say the name is not that important for me. Just the fact that they allow me to do what I like to do, which is teaching, I'm happy.
Yeah,
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 it's a natural pairing to have the teaching and a consulting engagement. The one can lead right into another. I know you've worked with some colleagues of mine where you go in and you do some training, and
mhm,
you're talking about things, and you cater the training to their needs and desires, in the sense of they're having certain performance problems, and you can sort of
mhm.
dive deep into those areas, and sort of work with them to resolve some of
Right.
those things and grow as a
Sure,
team as
and
well.
sure, that's right. But generally, even though I have a couple of 5-day classes as well as those seminars in the conferences, but one fundamentals class, one an advanced class, but the skeleton is kind of a skeleton that has a published outline. Um, but always when you deliver, it runs differently. It's a little bit like a map,
Mhm.
and I usually like to use this analogy when I teach, both in conferences like our upcoming past and, private delivery or public delivery of the class, that try to think of the outline as a map. And usually when you go visit a place, you could have some experience. Maybe you've been there in the past. Maybe it's new to you, So this would be the difference between a fundamentals and an advanced class. And also, you don't want to try and see every possible, location. You want to kind of focus more attention on fewer locations, try to kind of learn about them better. You have a better experience, you learn better, you come out of this experience feeling, more fulfilled in a way, as opposed to trying to see every, single place on the map. So in kind of a similar way, when I teach, it could be that the outline is a certain outline, but the delivery every time is something completely different, not just in the private cases, but also in those public deliveries. You feel the audience, the questions that they have and so on. And, after many years, when you feel yourself very comfortable with the material, it's very natural, very easy kind of to adjust to people's needs and spend more time on things they ask. That's what I really like, the interaction. And sometimes, in those bigger conferences, when you're in front of an audience with 500 people, it's a bit harder, to get the questions and so on. But actually, with the online format, like the one that we will have in PASS, at least people have the opportunity, to type questions in a chat box. And I love when people interact. Maybe, I just checked the numbers, and it seems like one of the sessions has something like 350 people there. So probably it will be hard to answer every single question, but I love it when those questions are coming in. And then, it becomes more interactive. And also for me, it becomes much more interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Wow. So you've probably attended every single pass since 1999. Is that correct? Have you?
I think that my first one could have been the 2002, if I remember correctly.
Okay. Okay.
Actually, you know what? Could be earlier. Maybe the first one I spoke at
Okay.
was 2002. But
San Francisco,
very
2000?
likely I was there. No, actually, I don't think I was there in the San Francisco one.
Okay.
But it could be that I was there earlier. But if I remember correctly, the first one I spoke at was 2002. This was quite traumatic experience for me, because I get very excited when I speak publicly, and this was my first big event.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
And I was jet lagged. I back then I lived in Israel, and I came with my wife to Seattle, and I was supposed to give a lecture, and then I went and I checked where I'm supposed to speak, and the agenda said you're in ballroom 6C. And I checked in the map, and it seemed like this. All of the rooms are kind of small rooms, and this was like this huge room, and there were over 500 people registered. Wow. And I panicked.
No kidding.
It was like I had 2 more days until my lecture, and I just didn't sleep for 2 nights.
Wow.
And then I went. I got some ice from some vending machine. I filled the sink in the toilets with the ice and water. I shoved my head inside. I went to get a triple coffee, and then I went and gave the lecture. It went pretty well, surprisingly, but yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic! Wow, yes. Yeah. So that would be the Washington State Convention Center 6C. Is that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
That is a very large room indeed. Very daunting to the uninitiated. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's when the audience is really there and interested in just the material, at some point, you just start focusing on the technical part, and then it becomes really fun. Yes. And I remember, like 5 minutes before I started the session, someone just approached, and just said, back then there was the NNTP forums, and there was some kind of a question, and you answered, and it really solved the problem for me, and I just wanted to say thank you, and somehow it made me all relaxed.
Yeah.
And then I started the session.
Yeah, no, interacting with the audience, I've learned, absolutely. It certainly makes it for a much more relaxing environment, much more of a conversation. It's a great way to start. Yeah, absolutely.
As soon as they start asking questions, this is really, the fun part.
Absolutely.
When it's not just a lecture, when you just sit there for, an hour, 75 minutes, just give a lecture,
Mm-hmm.
it's not the same experience compared to someone asking a question and then it starts becoming more like a conversation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you really enjoy the lecturing, but you've also been part of a number of books.
Uh-huh.
How is it? Did you enjoy the experience of writing in the book, or do you enjoy the finished result? And how is that for you, the writing
Well,
experience?
for me, the writing process is pretty painful.
Okay.
I am very happy with the result,
Yeah.
both with books and articles. There's the research part
Mm-hmm.
where I kind of constantly work on T-SQL kind of topics and challenges. That's
Mm-hmm.
the real fun part. But then for me, the English is still not a native language for me. I've been living
Mm-hmm.
in the US for the last 11 years, but still English is not a native language for me. So for me, most of the time I spend struggling with how to phrase what I know I want to say,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
in a way that is, easy to digest, really easy kind of to understand. So for me, the writing process for this reason is typically pretty painful. I
Yes.
can spend half an hour on a paragraph.
Mm.
I mean, at least I usually write the code first.
Mm-hmm.
This is the easy part for me, and also the fun part. I
Mm-hmm.
write the
Mm-hmm.
code, I solve the tasks, do the research. That's the most fun part, and then I need to put it into the text, and then the first paragraph usually can take me half an hour to an hour,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
I will reread sentences again and again and again, and keep changing and changing and changing. And I'm sure for people who are much more kind of fluent with English and it's more native tongue for them, it's the easier part.
Mm.
Uh,
Mm.
yeah, but
I don't
other
know. English is really the only language that I have that I'm really strong at. It takes me a long time to get those words. Just the examples, the drawing out the plan is the easy part. The getting the sentences so they're concise and clear.
oh yeah,
I don't know.
and
It's you
yeah,
do
you
it.
want to respect the reader's time.
Yes, yes,
So
absolutely.
you want to do a good job for them,
Hmm.
so that when they read, they don't feel like they wasted their time.
Indeed, indeed.
So you're probably very familiar with the Paul White. When I read his stuff, he's so efficient. He's
Yes.
both extremely accurate, extremely smart, extremely bright. Every time I read, I learn something
Mm.
from him.
Hmm.
Sometimes his stuff is over my head, but his kind of writing style is so efficient that
Right.
I can read a sentence and be just shocked how you can use English
Mm.
in such an efficient way to describe those kind of complicated technical things. And I strive to write like this, but I know that
Mm.
especially when it's not a native tongue for you, it's not just the native tongue. It's also another kind of skill that you need to have for this. But
Hmm.
I spent a lot of time just
Yeah.
to make sure that if I read this, if I was a reader reading this, you
Hmm.
know, I wouldn't feel like, gosh, he just wrote 10 pages saying nothing, and
Hmm.
he could have written it in 2 sentences or something like this.
Yes. Yes.
Uh,
No. I.
so yeah, that's the tough part. But
Hmm.
it's also an important thing that sometimes people ask, if you can give some tips in terms of how to improve my skills and so on. And the writing process, I've been writing a monthly column since I think the first one was 99.
Wow.
And it's an extremely, extremely healthy process.
Mm.
So
Hmm.
first of all, during the month, you want to pick a topic,
Hmm.
yeah. So you already start processing what would be interesting for people to read about, and then when you pick a topic, you start developing the examples and so on. And even if it's a topic that
Hmm.
you end up learning a lot every time. Even if it's
Absolutely.
fundamentals topic, supposed to be kind of basic stuff, it never is.
Yes,
And
you're quite right.
it helps you organize your thoughts, and especially when you need to put them into text, kind of you have to make sure that you're accurate and so on. So, when people try to, put a blog post out there every week or every couple of days, they get burned out very quickly. But
Hmm.
if you set yourself a goal, I'll write something once a month,
Right.
and it needs to be interesting enough for people,
Hmm.
to want to read it.
Hmm.
You put an effort into it, and in retrospect, you kind of look back and how many different topics that helped me also
Hmm.
do some research and learn some things and so on. So yeah, that's actually a good exercise, I would say.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. Instead of trying to get many out, work on quality as opposed to quantity, and yeah, absolutely. Every time I work on a presentation, I always learn something new that and
Oh yeah,
surprised it. These little things. It's like that it truly is a great way to learn is by attempting to teach it to someone else or explain it to someone
yeah.
else. Indeed. Yes. So you've got a few books, querying SQL. I don't even recall what the title was, but I recall going through and just reading it and going, wow, this is this. What do you feel is your most the book that you've worked on that you get the most recognition for, or that you look back and go, wow, that was really impactful? Is there one book if there?
Right. So let's say I have 3 books that I kind of maintain regularly. There's the T-SQL Fundamentals.
Okay. Yes.
It's not really a basics book. I keep getting comments even from people that have experience that say, that it filled all kinds of holes for them, and that kind of getting to understand the more formal aspects, it wasn't easy. So I would make a distinction between fundamentals and basics. There's the T-SQL querying book that is more advanced and gets into optimization, tuning aspects, and then there's the T-SQL Window Functions.
Yes.
So I keep maintaining those 3.
Okay.
Every time it's a new version of the product with enough, new stuff to justify. So I would say I would make a distinction between the one I like best.
Yes.
Even though I guess I'm not supposed to like one best. There's one I like best, and there's the one, like you say, that maybe I get more feedback that was more impactful. So the one I get most feedback about is T-SQL Fundamentals. And actually now I just finished writing the 4th edition.
Okay.
And I'm just waiting. It's just literally last week or so that I finished doing the 4th edition update. It's just that I'm waiting for the vNext
Yes.
to be released, because obviously I want to take the opportunity and make sure that any newer T-SQL elements are there. So it's kind of now being edited, but I won't release it until the next version of the product will be out. Okay. So this book, I waited with it. I wrote a few other books with more advanced topics before I wrote the fundamentals, because I always felt like there's such a bigger responsibility to release a book that covers foundations, because especially in this field, SQL being based on mathematical kind of foundations is very counterintuitive. People start learning it very quickly. They feel like they understand what they're doing, even though they're kind of following all kinds of patterns that maybe they've learned from other programming environments, and it just doesn't work the same way in this environment. So to really get the language correctly, you need to understand those kind of mathematical roots. I mean, you don't have to be a mathematician, but the aspects that originate in mathematical set theory, in predicate logic, relational theory. So anyone who reads the first chapter in Chris Date's book on SQL and relational theory, kind of gets, I would say, a shock that doesn't realize what's involved there. So with T-SQL Fundamentals, I didn't want to go as deeply as Chris Date, because it can be a little bit overwhelming for people. But I wanted to give enough roots so that people would write SQL using the correct mindset. So I waited a long time before I felt like I was ready. I wanted to teach the topic a lot, so I created a course, T-SQL Fundamentals, taught it for several years, got a lot of feedback from people before I felt confident enough to write the first version. So it was 2008 when I released the first edition.
Okay.
And it was, by the way, I started writing it 8 days after I stopped smoking. So it was quite an experience, because I remember that I was so scared. I actually believed that smoking improves your ability to concentrate. So I said, at the same time, I stopped smoking, and a few days later, starting the book, and I thought it would be a disaster because I would probably not be able to concentrate or anything. But it turned out okay. And for me, the most kind of amazing input that I get is I got several people, meeting me in a conference or writing an email and saying, I read the book and I chose this path in my career. This is that I wasn't really sure whether to focus on data or doing other things. And someone saying, I read this and I realized how deep this thing is and how fascinating the topic is. And I decided to make this my career. It's really...
That's very honoring. Yes. Wow.
Yeah, but more, it's kind of extremely, pleasing to hear that people also chose this field, realizing how deep it is and how much they can dedicate their entire lives,
yes,
to it and feel very kind of satisfied and so on. So yeah, this for me is the most kind of, let's say, emotional response. So I think that this is the most important project. But I like the T-SQL Window Functions book best. It's just the topic is so unbelievable. Yes. One of those things that you like you're getting a new tool. Mm-hmm. You think that it serves a certain purpose, that it solves a certain problem. Mm-hmm. But then over time you learn more and more about it and how many amazing things you can do with it.
Yes.
So it has kind of endless depth. Yes. In a way.
Yes.
So I really like this topic best.
Yes, I had your first edition of the T-SQL Fundamentals, and I believe I left it at a client's, and I never got it back. So now that the fourth edition is coming out, I will definitely pick that up. And the windowing functions books, I think I won that at PASS, and so it has your signature in it. And I'm certain it's not on this shelf, but it's definitely in the shelf in the other room.
Did you have the first or second edition? And the second edition was released for 2019. So.
Oh no, they would have been the first edition. Yeah.
The first. So there's actually, I don't know if this is interesting for you to know, but there's a funny story behind the title.
Oh yes.
For this first edition, the first edition wasn't called T-SQL Window Functions like the second. Okay. It was actually called High Performance T-SQL using window functions. And the story behind this was that when I proposed the book, this was to Microsoft Press, I explained that there's this class of functions called window functions that are, it's kind of, in a way it's a niche, but I felt like it can solve such a wide, mm-hmm. variety of tasks that it really deserved its own book. Mm-hmm. And I titled it T-SQL Window Functions, and we're getting very close to the publication. The book is done already, all the editorial cycles, and then at the end they give you the cover to approve it. And I see a cover with a different title than what I proposed. It actually had the title High Performance T-SQL, and I said, wait a minute. Yes, it can solve a lot of problems with the window functions, but to claim that this is about high performance T-SQL, when people feel like they get deceived,
yes,
they can be very, very angry. And
Absolutely.
You start with the correct title.
Yes, yes.
So you won't believe what kind of arguments I had with the publisher back then. It's wrong. It's you need to call things what they are.
Yes.
And somehow the only way to agree was to come with a compromise. So we left their suggestion for high performance T-SQL and my original using T-SQL window functions, but with the second version, with the second edition, I had a much easier time. And I just said, no, I'm just not willing to stick to this title, and we called it what it is.
Yes.
T-SQL window functions.
Yeah. To be quite honest, I knew it was about windowing functions, and correct me if I'm wrong, but did you have some influence to the SQL Server product group to adopt some of these functions? Because some of these concepts were put forward by the ANSI SQL standards, were they not?
Yes, I wouldn't say correct. So, I mean, first of all, it wasn't just me. It was, let's say, a big community effort. I'm not the only one who really believes in them. You will find many, many people anyone who has exposure to them feels like they're kind of super powerful. So back then there was, there used to be originally the Connect kind of platform where you could post feedback items and improvement requests, and later it became Azure feedback. So I did myself and several other folks from the community proposed a whole bunch of them. So the first cycle where they were introduced into the product was SQL Server 2005. And back then there was only the ranking and frameless window aggregates.
Okay.
But it was still so much more
Mm-hmm.
that there was indeed this big community effort in adding a lot of kind of feedback items, suggesting a lot of the standard elements, and they got a lot of community support. Nothing really happened there in 2008 or 8R2, but 2012 was kind of a major leap with lots and lots and lots of additional elements, and I'm sure we will see more. I mean, there was a further big effort in 2016 with the batch mode window aggregate, which was like really an amazing kind of engine effort. So maybe 2016 didn't really add any functional elements, but the treatment in the engine became really powerful. There was this string aggregate that was added in 2017. It's not exactly a window function, but it's kind of under the same class of analytical tools, what the standard calls audit set functions. But it's still a lot more. So, I mean, I'm guessing over time, the more people will get exposed to those tools, the more they will feel what they can do with them, how much utility they have, and they will naturally ask for more. So I'm guessing it's just a matter of time. There's a lot more in the standard for windowing functions and other analytical needs. What's raw pattern recognition is like a mind-blowing kind of concept for analytical needs, and people will gradually get exposed to those things. They will use them more and more in their solutions. They will ask for them, and sometimes it takes Microsoft time, but eventually those critical things make it. Think about string aggregate. How many decades have we asked for a string concatenation aggregate? So it happened in 2017, And how about the scalar user-defined function inlining? People have been asking for this for just 19 years, since the inception of user-defined functions in 2000. But it made it, 2019 was a very impressive project. If you look at the cases that they managed to inline with the scalar user-defined function inlining, I was shocked. I expected only kind of single expressions, functions that are based just on a return expression to be inlineable, but you see how they can take declaration and assignment of variables and inline, even case or even if statements, they manage to kind of convert to the relational case counterpart. So it's really impressive. It was, I'm sure, an immense project for them. So eventually those things that really matter to the community eventually do make it. I mean, they listen. So there's so much more in the SQL standard that I feel that could really be beneficial to us, and in some cases that other platforms actually already implemented. But with time, we just need to be a bit patient.
Yes,
I guess.
Indeed. And we think with all the languages that are out there today, that people are learning if they're developers, and you think how long ago that language existed, some of them only a few years. And you think, well, SQL, well, that was around before I was born, and I'm 50 years old now. So SQL as a language really has...
and I'm sure it will outlast us.
Yes, absolutely.
It's one of those rare, things in computing that lasts so long just because it works. It's based on very strong foundations, and it just works. The de facto language for data, there's no question about it. So
yes. You're doing a pre-con session. I see that it's got the word advanced in there.
Right.
And maybe you can talk a little bit about the pre-con session for a moment.
Sure. So the topic is one of my favorite topics to teach. I usually have two topics that I like to teach in those full day seminars. Usually I would either do a whole day fundamentals kind of a session, or I would do a whole day advanced one. And the seminar I'm doing this year is the advanced T-SQL querying and query tuning. So it's kind of combining both query tuning and optimization elements, as well as all kinds of T-SQL tools that you can use in advanced solutions. So from the optimization side of things, things like search arguments. You have the obvious kind of aspects of search arguments that many people understand, but then there are the kind of more sophisticated ones where sometimes you will have the optimizer do kind of transformations that take something that doesn't look like a search argument, but internally convert it or algebraize it basically as a search argument. So I'm going to talk about this as just one example. Join ordering optimization, some less trivial aspects of reordering joins, all kinds of newer elements like the intelligent and the adaptive query processing capabilities. But then you take some of those very powerful T-SQL tools, those window functions, the apply tool, and use them in very creative ways to solve all kinds of problems. And also it's very important to understand how they get optimized, because sometimes the tool will do extremely well under certain circumstances, but will do terribly under other circumstances. So some tools are sensitive. Apply actually is a good example. Other tools, maybe if you sort of don't use them in the right conditions, they will not do that terribly. They will kind of do okay. But other tools like apply, you really, really need to understand the conditions, both in terms of data characteristics and in terms of what kind of indexing works for them. And you need to understand under these conditions, it's wonderful to use the tool. And here's why. Other conditions, you'd be better off really using other tools. So that's kind of, one of those things that has both kind of a very exciting side to it in the sense that you get to employ your skills in learning how this engine works and when to use one tool versus another tool. Then again, you're thinking, wait a minute, in relational theory and standard SQL, we have this concept called physical data independence that is supposed to mean that you write your SQL code just thinking of the meaning, and the database engine is supposed to worry about how to physically handle it, both in terms of optimizing it and creating an appropriate plan, and accessing the data and handling the various algorithms. But the reality is that we're very far from that point, that it doesn't really matter how you write the code, as long as you write it correctly in English-like terms, let's say, that the engine will worry about how to handle it best. In practice, you can have two different queries, eventually returning the very same thing, but getting very, very different treatment by the optimizer. So even though theoretically it wasn't supposed to be like this, I mean, the vision behind relational theory behind SQL was that you would not need to worry about those things. The reality is, if you don't think about those things, you will typically get bad performing code. So there is this negative, I don't know if to say negative, but kind of going against the vision. But then again, anyone who ever tried implementing a database engine, well, not many tried. You need companies with very big resources. So it's a huge undertaking, and the product is doing well. So it's just that we need to adapt to this concept of, okay, it's not like we shouldn't care about how to write it as long as we write it correctly. We do need to learn how this platform handles the different query elements, and then kind of developing this understanding of, okay, so this language element has these strategies that can process it physically. This element has those strategies. Each of those strategies will do well under these conditions and badly under those conditions. Here's how each of those scales with respect to data size, what kind of indexes work well, and then when you develop this kind of knowledge, over time you start also getting an intuitive understanding of, okay, how do I mix those elements to create this good performing solution. So it's a much bigger challenge to write both a solution is correct and a good performing one. It adds interest. That's why you can end up spending 30 years and still enjoy every day that code.
A new puzzle each day.
Exactly.
A new puzzle each day. Yes.
So that's the focus basically in this seminar. That's what we're doing. Yeah, I am hoping it's a starting point for people. Yeah, that not only that, okay, they will learn the way the different elements get optimized, but the more important thing is that kind of developing this understanding of, here's the mindset I need to adopt, and when I tackle a new element, this is what I need to consciously kind of deliberately develop. I need to develop this understanding of how to optimize not just how to optimize, but how to learn to optimize things. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you've got a regular session as well, query tuning
Yeah.
tips concerning table expressions. And I think too, I
Right.
hear people frequently say, "Oh, don't do this, don't use a CTE for that," And I see CTE derived tables, views, and inline table functions are the for the things that you mentioned with regards to table expressions and tuning.
Yeah. So indeed, like many things in T-SQL, you have those tools for a reason, and sometimes when if the focus is performance and the sessions focus is understanding the query tuning considerations, so any given tool will have the right time and place for it. So sometimes it will make much more sense to actually physically persist some intermediate query results in temporary tables and such. Sometimes it will actually make sense to avoid this kind of persisting. And table expressions, they generally get inlined and or unnested, if you will. And there are circumstances where understanding how they do get optimized and in what circumstances unnesting will not take place, how you can prevent the unnesting, and we'll start with what unnesting is, obviously. But anyway, I'm saying there are certainly circumstances where understanding how they get optimized and sometimes adding certain language elements to your code, either to benefit from a certain optimization strategy or to prevent a certain optimization kind of activity, can help you eventually in improving your code. So the general idea is, like I said earlier, any given task, you have so many different ways to write it in T-SQL. And here I wanted to focus on one specific area. It's just because this query tuning world is so big. So showing specifically how table expressions get optimized and what kind of elements can change the way the SQL engine will handle them, and then how do you rely on it when you need to address a certain task, when it makes sense to use this tool versus when does it make sense to actually use a temporary table. So you will hear opinions also that say never use temporary tables. That is a bad idea. You will hear a lot of opinions saying don't use too many CTEs, don't use too many views, those kinds of things. So each of them has some sense in certain conditions, but there are certainly cases where it's a lifesaver, from an organization perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I guess before we go, one last piece is a memorable event. Is there a moment that you look back on a past summit or some other community event that brings a smile to your face?
Smile. I remember once I gave a lecture. I can't recall the year, but maybe it was maybe around 8 years, somewhere between 10 years ago or so. And I was giving one of those lectures that had a very large audience. And I remember that I showed a certain technique, and I explained that when using this particular technique that is supposed to be a very fundamental querying element, you would think that the engine is supposed to be able to use index order to support this particular querying element, but there was some aspect of optimization that prevented it from being able to rely on this kind of element. It was a row number function that when you partitioned by something and then ordered by something, say you ordered by something descending, say partitioned by customer, ordered by date descending, say. If you had an index on customer and order date but not descending, the optimizer didn't figure, hey, I can actually scan it backwards. And I showed, this is a good example for a descending index. And then it was very close to the end of the lecture, but then someone from the audience, I'm maybe it was Brad Schultz. I think it was a guy called Brad Schultz.
Okay.
I haven't seen him for a while, but I believe it was him. He said, that if you add an order by clause to the query that says order by customer ID descending, you know the optimizer figures to support the presentation order by, hey, I can actually scan the index backwards and also support the row number computation, avoid the sort. This seemed completely bizarre because it usually doesn't happen that you add an order by close to the query and it prevents a sort in the plan. And then I didn't believe it would work, but then I'm trying it, and it works. And kind of during this huge session when I'm supposed to teach people, I ended up kind of learning stuff. This was a good surprise, obviously. But yeah, this certainly, when I remember it now, brings a smile to my face that it was pretty cool.
Wow. Yeah. No, that does sound pretty good.
Yeah. And later on, obviously, I used this trick in my own sessions.
Yes.
So if you add this presentation order by, it prevents the sort in the plan. This was pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, that is great. Awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Itzik, for your time. I really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you in the future face to face at some point. Yes. It'll be great.
Yeah. Thank you. And I really appreciate Redgate, managing to pull this off, and doing this event is really nice of them. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, indeed. Me too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Itzik.
All right.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks.
Take care.